We're back with another episode of OST where we revisit hands from Poker Out Loud. This one is from a stream at the Run It Up Studios against Justin Young, where you end up making a pretty big fold.
Yeah, a little out of line.
Got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Sure.
So you decide to open the cutoff with ace-8 offsuit. Pretty standard.
Yep.
10 and a quarter. You open to 100. Pretty standard so far. Justin Young defends the big... Is it the big blind or the straddle?
The big blind.
So he defends the big blind with 9 of diamonds, 9 of clubs. All pretty standard so far. Ace, 9, 3. Ouch. Justin Young checks. Pretty natural check, right?
Yeah.
Advantage board for you, so he checks. And it's on you. You have the decision whether to bet or to check. Let's hear your analysis.
Top pair for Berkey, as well as a board that he deems to be betting on high frequency. And
good
now
board for me.
Set.
This is probably one of the reasonable spots for me to check back, particularly because the 8 interacts with a lot of the target that I'm going after. My kicker's not so strong that I can expect to never be beaten by Justin's defending range, but also, I would be checking back hands like 9-8 as well. So having a stronger version of that hand, I guess, where the turn distribution around the 9 is favorable to my particular holding, is kind of cool. I do have the 8 of spades as well, which is kind of nice, reducing like the ability for him to turn combo draws. So I'm actually going to go ahead and check this back to protect myself a little bit.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that this is a pretty natural bet spot, obviously. Big blind's going to be super wide. But I thought that I had a reasonable candidate to play as a check back also. I'm going to want to have some ace-x in my check back range. Now, I think it's probably more intuitive to just have the ace of spades in a check back range. But my line of thinking was kind of the opposite. A lot of Justin's available check raises are going to come from hands that possess the ace of spades, which would put me in a really weird spot when I have the middling aces specifically. So when I have ace king, no spade, or ace king, no ace of spade, pretty happy to get, not necessarily happy to get check raised.
How necessary is it to protect a check, do you think here?
On this texture, probably more than not, I would think.
If not ace-8, then where are you pulling from? Lower aces?
As far as like hands I want to bet?
Hands you want to protect your checking range with and check.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. So I guess that's a pretty fair point. Well, I think ace-8 is particular in the sense that like the 8 blocks the 9 in a lot of ways. So it has a lot of interaction with the 9, both positive and negative for me. When I choose to bet, it kind of has a negative correlation to the 9 because it's going to be blocking
some of your value target.
Yeah. Some of the hands that I'm trying to target there in that middling region, pocket 8s, 8-10 of spades, a lot of these other types of hands that my opponent could continue with.
8-9.
Yeah, 8-9 offsuit. I think Justin is going to be calling relatively wide. But then it has a kind of a positive interaction with it in the sense that when through cards come off on the turn, be it a 6, a 7, a 10, even a 9 itself, now having that 8 in my hand is kind of helpful. It kind of anti-blocks in a way that is beneficial to my particular top pair holding, in the sense that like I'm a lot less concerned with those semi-range cards from my opponent.
Sure.
Improving his actual holding all that greatly.
You land on a check, and we see the queen of spades on the turn. Justin Young decides to overbet lead for 300. Let's hear his analysis.
Obviously a great flop for us. Not the best turn, but it's one of those where I think with him checking back, he's actually showing some reasonable strength. Or that he's just checking enough, which is fine either way. With the spade hitting the turn, I think we should bet a little big here and really like tax him and make him think about like all his marginal like value hands. Checking seems really bad. It seems thin and like way too ambitious, I think, against a guy like Berkey.
not a whole lot to pick from there. He basically is, I would say that he's looking at this a little bit through tunnel vision. So the way Justin sees this is that, well, first and foremost, he said that he thinks my check back is strong, which I can't help but think is just a byproduct of him having a set and thinking that, or wanting basically me to have a lot of showdown value when I check back.
I think that could be fair. Perhaps he's just thinking like all your nothing is just going to naturally c-bet a range advantage board.
Fair.
All your broad, not all of them, not the good ones, but like the worst Broadway.
Yeah, I think we
connectors.
need to be a little bit particular in how we're choosing to c-bet this flop. Like, yes, Jack 10 is going to bet at a really high frequency, but King Queen doesn't necessarily have to. And we can ping pong back and forth throughout the portions of the range.
Right.
But also, just because I have showdown value doesn't mean that like I'm strong. If I choose to check back sixes here, that's not really a hand that's going to do anything moving forward. So I think that like his analysis is semi-fair, but it's also semi-limited. If his assertion is correct that I have strong showdown value when I check back, he should also assume that I have a lot of spades. I should be checking back a fair amount of my spade draws, particularly like when I have the board crippled with a hand like ace king of spades. That hand might not be all that inclined to bet flop, being that, you know, it really reduces the types of combinations Justin can continue with. So I think that might be where his thinking goes off the rails a little bit initially. And what it leads him to is wanting to bet large because he has a hand of high equity himself, and he wants to effectively charge or deny the equity.
He's basically just assuming inelasticity, right?
Well, he's assuming inelasticity, and he's also assuming it because he thinks the majority of my range contains one spade. Like, that's basically what he says, is that he wants to charge a lot of my pocket pairs that could improve.
Sure.
So particularly, you know, kings with the king of spades, queens with the queen of spades, like all these types of hands that I could potentially have. Which would probably naturally, I guess not queens with the queen of spades. But,
yeah, I was going to say, it's not that relevant, but
right.
Queen of Spades on the board.
Yeah. But like kings with the king of spades, jacks with the jack of spades, whatever. A lot of these hands are also just going to choose to bet when he chooses to check. So I actually don't think here's what I said in, well, I guess we can hear what I said in real time.
Let's hear what you got to say.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting spot. I have a pretty natural two-street bluff catcher, but when he chooses an overbet on the turn here, it's a byproduct of him having too many bluffs in this spot. I don't actually know that he really does, however. I don't think I can fold here, though I am a little suspect that he's over bluffing this spot, or even really bluffing at the appropriate frequency. This board texture just interacts so heavily with even my check back range, especially when I could just have ace x of spades that he's now betting into. If he's choosing to go this large with like naked ace of spades, I'm probably beaten half the time anyway. That said, I did check back with the purpose, and I probably, though my gut's kind of telling me to deviate away from the plan a little bit now, I can't really get past that feeling.
Yes, we had this exact conversation.
His bet just isn't in line with a bluff line at all.
Agreed, Berkey.
It's a max value line, really, and it's imbalanced that way heavily. I actually am changing my decision. I'm going to make an exploitative fold here.
This is pretty amazing.
Yes.
Doesn't
I'm gonna go
eat
ahead
too.
Yes.
Hey, he hasn't
let him
folded
take
yet.
this
Graphics,
one.
go back.
To
Go
me,
back.
it just seems like he's setting up a target versus a queen. He could be naked here. He could have a hand like Jack 10 of hearts for sure, where he was just one and done kind of thing. But
Is he gonna do it?
Yeah, he's gonna do it.
I'm just not confident.
This is
enough
pretty
to
insane.
blind
Boom.
No way!
Stand by it?
Yeah, obviously it allowed me to arrive at the right decision. But effectively what I'm viewing this as is Justin's range is incredibly wide, right? He has a big blind defense range who, of all the people at the table, he and I are probably defending more hands than most.
Is it worth noting that there was also Was there a straddle? There wasn't a straddle.
No straddle.
Okay, that makes more sense then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
A lot of hands.
yeah, he's defending probably wider than most,
Mm-hmm.
myself included. And because of that, so let's say he's defending like 60% of range, which I think is probably reasonable for somebody who over defends the big. Now all of a sudden he lands on this turn with 60%. He still has that entire 60% range, right?
Because he's checking range on the flop.
Right. So when we choose a polar sizing here, recognize that like maybe 10% of that range can actually choose this size.
Yeah.
For him to just be perfectly selecting the appropriate value hands and the appropriate bluffs for this size is impossible. It's impossible. So one of two things is happening here. He's either drastically over bluffing the spot, where he's just choosing way too many of the hands that could potentially bet pot and a quarter or pot and a half, whatever he chose.
300 into 250.
Yeah. So like pot and a sixth, I guess. Or pot and a fifth. 1.2x pot. he could be way bluff heavy here, right? And that would be the intuitive thing to believe, because he's going to have a lot of 7 high hands, 6 high hands. What was the dangler? It was ace 9-3.
Ace 9-3.
Yeah. So he's gonna have a lot of 8 high, 7 high, 6 high, 5 high that are just here now.
Those hands can't all bet 300.
Right. And this is arriving me to the case in point. He's incentivized to check. He's just incentivized to check range because at the end of the day, he has too many bluffs to pull from in order to construct a betting range. And his value side is very linear in nature. So he's going to have everything ranging from the nuts all the way down to like middle or bottom pair that are going to have different motivations behind betting and going to want to select different types of sizes. So even just from the value side, trying to pull the hands that are going to want to actually overbet becomes very challenging, right? You're not going to be able to find a lot of flushes that want to do this because I could have just checked back ace deuce of spades, right? So now you're going to want to have the ace of spades in hand when you choose to do this.
I was saying this to Chin the other day that it's really hard to polarize. Theoretically, I was just thinking it's probably pretty hard to polarize on ace high boards where the ace is offsuit and there are 3.
Right.
Because your logical hands to bluff would be the ones that block the nut, flush the nuts.
Right.
But then you have top pair.
Right.
So how can you polarize on these textures?
Right. And I think the way that my instinct, I did run this, but I haven't looked at the analysis yet. My instinct as to how, if we were forced to choose this polar size that he selects, my instinct is that we would select hands like ace 9 with the ace of spades, ace 3 with the ace of spades for value. And then we would choose hands like 4-5, no spade as our bluff. Or I guess like if we have offsuit combinations of 4-5, we would select maybe those as well. The ones with the spade, maybe at a slightly higher frequency. My whole point is this is very non-intuitive and it's just not very self-serving. I imagine that it's a pretty low frequency play and one that's just like heavily disincentivized because we're going from both ranges being in realization and still remaining relatively wide all the way to an immediate polarizing play.
I think you sift through that pretty well in real time.
Yeah.
And arrive on a fold. Should we move to the computer?
Yeah. Okay. So if we take a look at the analysis from the solver's perspective here, we see that Justin's checking pretty much range. Actually, I guess I should first identify like what the ranges are. So if we take a look at what my range is, I'm going to have a pretty fair range for a cutoff open. It's going to be relatively wide. I gave myself ace 8 off plus, all pairs, suited connectors of 5-4 suited plus, suited one gappers of 6-4 suited plus, a lot of suited queens, kings, and jacks, and then all suited aces and broadways. Pretty standard for a cutoff open, maybe a little bit on the wide side at 27%, but I think in a 6 max live game, it's very reasonable. We have Justin defending about 48% of his range. So here we have him 3-betting Tens at about 75% frequency, jacks at 85, queens 85, kings and aces 100, ace king at 100, ace queen at 85. Everything else is going to be some mix between calling, folding, and 3-betting, with the exception of his suited aces, which may be a slight mistake.
How are we splitting the suited broadways?
I gave him 3/4 call, 25% 3-bets for the suited broadways. And to be fair, I didn't give him enough probably of suited aces 3-betting, but that's just trying to make his play more justifiable here. So I want to give him all. I basically want to give him the most extreme case of being able to justify this large bet on the turn by having the most nut flushes. Just to kind of demonstrate.
To make it a more appropriate case study control for the...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Just to demonstrate, like if we go to the farthest extremes, it becomes even more obvious that this play is disincentivized. So if we take a look at the flop play, my choice between checking, betting, and betting full pot, or sorry, 3/4 pot, I gave myself a check, a down bet of 20%, and a 3/4 pot bet. The solver likes each option at about an even frequency. If we take a look at ace-8 off, the combinations that possess the 8 of spade but not the ace of spades are betting small about 1/3 of the time, and large nearly never, about 17% of the time. So my exact combo is actually checking back about 47% of the time. So I did kind of land on the preferred play for this hand specifically on this texture. For me, that's a bit of a deviation. My default here is definitely to bet. I would probably just choose a down bet here at a pretty high frequency with this exact combo. But I also think Justin's a formidable opponent who is going to check raise a little bit wider than most.
Is there any danger to letting, I don't even know how many combos, 500 combos, realize that equity?
I don't think so. I think you have a lot of them just dead.
Sure.
All you're really doing is allowing those combos to kind of improve their EV slightly on turn distributions. But you're just going to have a natural bluff catcher with this particular candidate on like all turns, right? So whether the turn is an ace, a 9, a 3, a spade, a through card, the 8 really does hold its value for us in some sort of way. Okay, when we land on the turn, we do see that Justin's preferred strategic option here is, collectively with range to be checking. He'll be checking at about 76% frequency. That's right in line with what I kind of assumed would be the case. He's choosing a half pot bet about 20% of the time. If we take a look at nines exactly, we see that it just doesn't really bet very often. So it's going to be checking here about 85% of the time. It'll choose the half pot option about 6%. And it does choose the large option here about 8% of the time, which is kind of surprising to me. I would have thought that hand wouldn't really qualify for the large bet. But I guess what it does benefit from is that it has the ability to improve whenever I call with a hand like Jack 10 of spades or King Jack of spades, something of that nature. But it does seem like it has some reverse implied odds as well, as I would be incentivized, I imagine, to check back a hand like aces with the ace of spades or maybe queens without a spade, where now I have 9 set of a set and they have a lot of negative EV attached. If we take a look then at what does choose the large sizing, that's going to be what falls into the blue. So no surprise, we do see that ace 9 with the ace of spades is being played this way at about 60% frequency. We can see that happening in 3 different distributions. We see ace 3 with the ace of spades a little less often, only 33%. But it does like to choose the overbet at some small amount there. It'll choose king 7 off with the king of spades as pulling from its bluffs. I imagine it's just because it's its worst king available to it, and it needs to start finding bluffs somewhere. And then as I kind of predicted, it's choosing 5-4 as its most frequent bluff. So 5-4 of diamonds is choosing this large bet 45% of the time. 5-4 of clubs and hearts about 25% of the time. And then it's just going to go down the line ranking wise. So it's going to start pulling some bluffs from 6-3, 5-3, 4-3, all relatively low frequency. Any 5 deuce and 4 deuce that Justin has in range, it's going to utilize those as well at a high frequency. Same thing with 3 deuce, etc. So really, it's just choosing its lowest EV hands that still potentially have outs when called to make this overbet sizing with. And whenever we look at what I'm supposed to defend through a call, we see it's not very much. I am supposed to call with ace-8 offsuit when I do have the ace or the 8 of spades. So you can see my candidate actually does defend through a call at 100% frequency. But I don't really think that matters. I don't think we need to start finding balance here in a scenario where I'm pretty confident.
Is Justin in reality actually selecting all these hands?
That was what I was getting at. I'm pretty confident that he's just not taking 5-4 of diamonds and betting pot and a half or pot 1.2x pot.
There's no way. How can you?
Right. And I'm very confident that he's not taking the king of spades 7 off and just doing this as well. Right. It's just like my range is too protected, I think, through checkbacks. And if you look at like how precise he needs to be at this size, there's very, very, very little blue, right? If we just eliminate the other options, we just make everything else white. And now suddenly you'll see just how little he has available to him in this large size. So it's really, 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 really critical that he gets this right. He does get to do it a little bit with ace queen with the ace of spades, but again, that's for value. And that also would align itself for me just like folding my hand a little bit more frequently. If we look at what a normal bet size should be, which is him choosing the half pot option, now he gets to do this with a more intuitive range. And I think that this is a lot more of what we would expect to see him choose whenever he does actually bet this size. So he's going to be betting, coincidentally, whenever he turns the nuts with like ace jack of spades, ace 10 of spades, ace 9 of spades, hands like that. I'm on the wrong node. Okay. So now we're going to be seeing a lot of the bets come out of the nut flushes, the top pairs with good kickers, ace jack, ace 10, ace queen, hands like that. We're going to see a lot of these other hands like middling pairs start leading for half pot. Now ace 8 is going to play very naturally as a defend. I'm not going to have any problems continuing. He's also going to be able to pull pretty correctly from his bluffing region. So we'll start to see hands like 10-7 off begin bluffing. Maybe he's not going to be utilizing that specific candidate, but I imagine that he would start leaning more intuitively to like jack 8 off.
I think the takeaway here is you just really recognize that he can't be like, he's incredibly value heavy.
Right.
Just leaning value, assuming like that you have equity and are going to call regardless. Right.
And yeah, that's really what it distills down to, is that he's kind of on an island. And if we take a look at how I'm supposed to defend versus his bet, I'm only supposed to call with my highest EV hands, right? Yeah. So, my hand is a natural defend, but I don't think I'm making any errors because I have so many better hands to be calling with. I'm calling with queens in full. I'm calling with, ace 9 in full. I'm calling with hands that have particular interaction with the board that reduce the amount of strong hands that he could potentially
have flushes.
Right. Okay. I've flushes that I've checked back for sure. I have just better ace highs, or not ace highs, but top pairs that have better redraw value, right? So I'm just going to have ace king with a spade that is going to be a much more confident call.
That checks the flop, you think?
Some of the time. I think I'm more likely to just have ace king of spades.
Yeah.
But some of the time I might just like take one off with ace of spades, king X. Just in order to potentially, you're right in the sense that like that hand doesn't mind being check raised. And I think that's more the way we're framing our check back range when we're protecting. It's like, it would be a real travesty to get check raised when we have ace-8 with the 8 of spades.
Yeah, I the way I do it usually is just take the hands that can't go for 3 for value. Like, I just take bottom of value and check.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
Like
very
showdown.
very reasonable.
I don't know.
No, I think that's totally reasonable.
It makes
way
it
to do
easier to implement, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, so even though my fold isn't necessarily solver approved, I think that it becomes so if we begin to like node lock it out.
I mean, of course, if we node lock like his high equity hands, he's leading it. It's just gonna save.
Right, and that's the whole case in point here is when we recognize, understand that he's only supposed to choose that bet size 2% of the time at equilibrium, right? That's very much 0.
Yeah.
So when a relatively 0% play comes through, we should then recognize that our opposition is deviating from what's incentivized.
Yeah. Whenever something like really low frequency happens, they just have it. They're not like finding creative.
And the reason for that is because they're deviating away from what's incentivized. So they're making up their own incentives. And largely speaking, that's going to be born out of, I need to recoup value from a street that I've already lost. Right. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really interesting hand. I'm thankful to Justin for allowing me to make a big fold.
Yeah. Tried to exploit Matt Berkey. Got the horns.
Yeah, we really gave it to him.
Saw through it. I want to talk briefly about this isolating binary options thing.
Okay.
I think it's super, super helpful. Like I've been doing it with my students. Shameless plug, by the way.
Sure.
I do offer personal coaching. If you can't afford the $1,000 an hour for Matt Berkey, I'm also available. Talk you through some of the Solve for YTV content. But what I do with my students is they'll do stuff like, it'll be like limp, 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 and they'll open 8s out of the big blind or 7s out of the big blind.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you have to start by identifying the incentive of your range. Like, don't look at your hand. Just think about the incentive of your range if a bunch of people limp. You can either raise to 70 or check. Like, don't allow options in between.
Yeah.
Makes it much clearer. Like, the strategic incentive.
For sure.
Because they hedge.
Right. They just choose 30 with 8s.
Right. They make it 30 and everybody calls. I'm like, this isn't working, you know?
Right.
But that works in like a lot of different strategic scenarios for figuring out what's best.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like climbing a mountain, where when you have your sights set on the peak, you should keep options very narrow and enjoy that tunnel vision. So you should keep as many binary options as possible. Then once you get to the crest, you should understand that there's more available, right? And now you should start adding options back in. So effectively, if we're talking about the learning curve, as we're climbing, we should try to keep things as simple and binary as possible in the decision tree as you kind of outlined.
Yeah.
And to be fair, like the example you gave should pretty much always be binary.
Yeah.
But when we start to get a better understanding of the strategy as a whole, the options that are available to us, what equilibrium looks like, how we can further delve into this kind of stuff, now all of a sudden we should be able to allow for multiple bet sizes. So we should have, if we're studied enough, we should have multiple 3-bet sizes. We should have multiple C-bet sizes. We should have multiple turn sizes in specific spots. Not always.
Yeah. I mean, it works in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know, they'll open ace jack off and then it'll go like 4 ways. Then it'll be like king 10-4 and they C-bet like 1/3.
Yeah.
I'm like, look, if you're choosing to attack the field as a whole, you either have to pick like a fat size in general. I mean, we can circle back and figure out the nuance later, but
sure,
either a polar size or check.
Yeah.
You can't be doing this shit, you know?
Right.
Identify the incentive of your rate, or like 6, 7, 9, you know, boards like that.
Yeah.
That's all for today. Big Folds by Matt Berkey.
A lot more to come.
Matt Hunt has a new course out. MTT course. Method. Tactics. Technique.
I get it.
Yes.
MTT.
It's clever.
Yeah.
Can always count on Hunt for the acronyms.
I like that. He's a language guy.
Yeah. That is on solvefory.io. If you like this content, want to see some more, solvefory.io. That is it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button.